Unit 2, cells, prokaryotic cells in endosymbiotic theory. Go!
You just learned about eukaryotic cells. So these are the kinds of cells that plants, animals, and protists and fungi have. They have a nucleus where the DNA is contained. There's a cell membrane, and they have many organelles inside.
Yep.
True. So prokaryotic cells would be bacterial cells and archaea, and they do not have these membrane-bound organelles. They simply just have a little bit of DNA. They have a cell wall, a cell membrane. Some have a flagella. So those things would be in common with a eukaryotic cell. They also have ribosomes.
But they don't have those membrane-bound organelles like we talked about for eukaryotic cells. They don't have, their DNA is not a nucleus. It's just kind of floating around the cytoplasm. No mitochondria or endoplasmic reticula or Mr. Pappas' favorite, the Golgi apparatus. So those membrane organelles are missing.
They do have ribosomes.
True.
They do. So as we said, here is a comparison of the two. You can kind of look over this, but prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus, and eukaryotic cells do.
Prokaryotic cells do not have membrane-bound organelles, whereas eukaryotic cells do.
The kinds of organisms that are made of prokaryotic cells would be bacteria and archaea, which are like bacteria, kind of. And the kind of cells, or the kind of organisms that are made of eukaryotic cells are fungi, plants, animals, and protists.
Most of the time, prokaryotic cells are single-celled organisms, right? Like archaea and bacteria are both single-cell organisms.
Yeah, so prokaryotic cells, I think, are always unicellular.
True.
And eukaryotic cells can be unicellular or multicellular.
Also true.
And the DNA in a prokaryotic cell is a singular loop of DNA, while in a eukaryotic cell it's very long and linear strands that are coiled up, packed into the nucleus of a cell. I actually really like that picture at the bottom too, because it kind of shows an example of the sizes of the two cells. And eukaryotic cells are usually larger than prokaryotic cells.
There's always exceptions to that, but yeah.
True.
And
Most of the time.
And just looking, you can see that eukaryotic cells are more complex. There's more things going on, kind of specialized organelles that have special jobs, where the prokaryotic cells are simpler.
There's evidence that shows that prokaryotic cells were first on Earth about 3.5 billion years ago. There are structures called stromatolites, which just means a layered rock, and there are fossil stromatolites that show these layers that would indicate that they were made by something that is like bacteria, and they're about 3.5 billion years old. These first prokaryotics lived in anaerobic environments, which means there was no oxygen, and they tended to live in very harsh environments, which were very hot or cold or
Extreme.
Yep.
So our best estimate right now is that the Earth, as a planet, is around 4.5 billion years old. So this was a whole 1 billion years after the Earth was first formed. We found these first prokaryotic cells, or evidence that there are first prokaryotic cells.
So it's probably true that prokaryotic cells were the first living organisms on Earth. And so we want to talk about how we went from these very simple unicellular organisms to much more complex eukaryotic cells. And we're going to talk about one of the theories that has a lot of evidence now.
So we're going to talk about the endosymbiotic theory, which is basically a theory that explains how, like Ms. Berna said, we went from these simple prokaryotic cells to more complex eukaryotic cells. And the theory kind of starts with evidence that the mitochondria, or the chloroplasts, actually were once their own individual cells.
And so these smaller individual cells, like in this picture, would be the purple circle on the left, were engulfed or probably tried to be ingested by a bigger cell. and then kind of slowly over time, so the mitochondria and chloroplasts weren't actually digested, but they just started living inside of that bigger cell.
And since both of these bacteria benefited from this, so the smaller cell, the purple one that was engulfed, was protected from being eaten by other bacteria. The larger cell, the green one, maybe got some of the energy that the purple cell was creating. It was beneficial for both of them, and over time, as the cell divided and made more bacteria, the internal bacteria was passed on over and over and over, and over a long period of time, they just became one organism.
So, what's some evidence to support this theory? Well, the mitochondria and the chloroplasts actually they resemble a bacterial cell. Like we said earlier in the last video, they both have double membranes, which one membrane probably was theirs and another membrane probably came from the fact that they were engulfed from another cell.
Both mitochondria and chloroplasts are something that produce their own energy. So something that could conceivably at one time be making its own energy from itself. Mitochondria by consuming kind of food, and chloroplasts by using sunlight.
Both of these organelles have their own DNA. So they have DNA that's independent from the DNA held in the nucleus of a eukaryotic cell. And they both reproduce on their own. They don't wait for the whole cell to reproduce. Mitochondria can reproduce on their own, and chloroplasts can reproduce on their own because they have their own DNA.
Word.
Is that all the evidence that we need to know?
Mm-hmm. That's all of it.
Yep.
That's it.
Good. Nice. Next.